There is a certain kind of woman you may have met before. She is magnetic, almost intoxicating. Her presence pulls you in like the moon tugs at the tides. She might be endlessly fascinating, emotionally intense, wildly intelligent, even mysterious. But something about her feels just out of reach. You cannot quite place it, but there's a shadow trailing behind her charm. And if you stay close long enough, you start to notice it. The confusion, the self-doubt, the emotional roller coaster that began to seem like your new normal. Carl Jung had a word for this energy. He called her the Anima, the feminine archetype that lives in the unconscious of every man. But Jung did not just leave it at metaphor. He warned that the feminine force in its distorted or unconscious form could become deeply destructive, especially if a man is unaware of his own inner dynamics. Today, we like to talk about red flags and toxic relationships. We scroll through TikToks about narcissism and codependency, about love bombing and gaslighting. But long before these ideas entered the language of modern psychology, Jung was already pointing at something eerily similar, something darker, something ancient. He believed that the way a man experiences women is deeply tied to the unconscious image of femininity he carries within him, and if that image is distorted, through trauma, repression, or cultural programming, then he will not truly see the woman before him. He will project, and in that projection, he may be seduced not by her, but by his own shadow. This is not a script about blaming women, nor is it about simplifying the complexity of human relationships into black and white categories. It is about understanding the psychological machinery that quietly shapes our desires, our blind spots, our pain. Jung's warning was not moral. It was psychological. He wanted us to become aware of the masks we project onto others, and of the archetypal forces at play when intimacy turns confusing, obsessive, or even destructive. Why is this still relevant? Because despite all our modern knowledge, we are still ruled by inner forces we barely understand. Relationships fall apart not just because of incompatibility, but because of unexamined wounds. Men today are bombarded with mixed messages. Be sensitive, but not weak. Be strong, but not controlling. Chase love, but do not lose yourself. And somewhere in this storm, some men keep encountering the same pattern, a certain kind of woman who brings out both their deepest longing and their most painful confusion. This has happened for centuries. In ancient myths, she was the siren who lured sailors to their deaths. In medieval tales, she was the enchantress whose kiss cost knights their minds. In Jung's time, she was the Anima, the mirror of a man's soul, for better or worse. So today, let us explore. What did Carl Jung really mean by the dark feminine? What is the hidden psychological truth about some women that men must know, not to fear, but to become free? Let's begin. To understand Carl Jung's startling insights into the feminine psyche, particularly the darker expressions that can entangle a man, we need to look back. Because this idea, that the feminine holds not just nurturing power but also the potential for chaos, is not new. It has echoed through myth, religion, art, and philosophy for thousands of years. In Jungian psychology, the anima is the unconscious feminine side of a man. She is not a literal woman, but a psychological figure, an inner archetype shaped by culture, personal experience, and inherited memory. But before Jung gave it a name, civilizations around the world had already intuited her existence. Let's begin with mythology. In ancient Greece there was Circe, the enchantress who transformed Odysseus's men into swine. Her beauty and allure masked a profound psychological power. She was the woman who could strip a man of his identity. The warning embedded in her myth is not that women are dangerous, but that when a man encounters a woman who activates unconscious desires, fears, or wounds, he can lose his sense of self. He becomes reactive, easily manipulated, or entirely obsessed. The same is true of the siren. those half-woman, half-bird creatures whose song lured sailors to their deaths. Homer's Odyssey does not describe them as evil, but rather irresistible. That's the key idea. The feminine force is not inherently dark, but when met unconsciously, it becomes overpowering. It represents the unknown, the emotional, the irrational, all things a man may fear or crave without understanding why. Across other cultures, similar figures appear. In Hindu mythology, the goddess Kali represents both creation and destruction. She is divine, but terrifying, dancing on the corpse of her consort Shiva, tongue dripping with blood, eyes wild with intensity. Kali is not just horror. She is liberation through destruction. She destroys illusion. But for the unprepared, that experience is traumatic. Jung believed these stories were more than metaphor. He saw them as symbolic representations of real psychological processes. When a man meets a woman who embodies qualities his conscious mind has rejected, wildness, emotionality, eroticism, mystery, he may be drawn in with overwhelming force. This is projection. He is not in love with her as a person, but with the part of himself he has not yet made peace with. Throughout history, this projection often took violent or oppressive forms. In Christian Europe, the Madonna whore complex reigned. Women were either holy mothers or sinful temptresses. The complexity of femininity was denied. A woman who stepped outside her expected role, who challenged a man's sense of control or morality, was often labeled a witch, a seductress, or a danger to society. One of the clearest examples comes from the Malleus Maleficarum, a 15th century witch-hunting manual. It warned that women were more carnal than men, more deceptive, and more likely to collude with the devil. What is this if not fear of the dark feminine? Not of women per se, but of the unknown power they seem to hold over men's psyches. Rather than integrate that fear, society projected it outward, punishing women for the unresolved psychological work men had not done. Fast forward to the 19th and early 20th centuries. Victorian ideals suppressed female sexuality while simultaneously romanticizing feminine fragility. Women were angels in the house, or else fallen women, corrupting and corrupted. Carl Jung was writing in this cultural context, but instead of moralizing, he observed. He saw that many of the men who came to him for therapy were emotionally confused, lost in their relationships, obsessed with women they both adored and resented. He realized they were not seeing the women clearly. They were seeing their anima. The anima, in its positive form, helps a man connect to his emotions, his intuition, his capacity for love and creativity. But in its negative or immature form, the anima becomes a femme fatale, an inner voice that seduces, confuses, destabilizes. Jung noted that when a man has not consciously engaged with his anima, he tends to project it onto real women, idealizing or demonizing them without truly knowing who they are. Relationships built on this foundation are unstable, often destructive. Here's where things become hauntingly relevant to the modern world. Today's culture has become obsessed with romantic intensity. We idealize passion, chemistry, whirlwind attraction. But Jung warned that intense feelings are not always signs of deep connection. Sometimes they are signs of unresolved inner conflict. If a man grew up emotionally neglected, he may crave validation from a woman who mirrors his unmet needs. If he was shamed for his emotions, he may become fixated on women who express emotion freely, then feel overwhelmed or threatened by their depth. Social media only amplifies this. With endless reels, dating profiles, and hyper-curated aesthetics, projection is not just common, it is practically designed into the system. We fall in love with ideas, not people. And often, when the reality of a person does not match the fantasy we created, we feel betrayed. Jung would say, "This is not her fault. It is your unconscious trying to get your attention." In Eastern philosophies, the same idea appears. In Taoism, the feminine principle is yin, dark, receptive, mysterious, powerful. In balance with yang, it creates harmony. But imbalance creates distortion. If a man suppresses his inner yin, he becomes hyper-rational, disconnected from his emotional body, and when he meets a woman who embodies that yin, he may be drawn in compulsively, only to fear and resent the very qualities that attracted him. So, what has changed? Not much, in essence. The feminine still holds deep psychological power over the masculine, not because women are manipulative or dangerous, but because men often meet the feminine unprepared. They have not explored their emotional landscapes. They have not examined the mother wounds, the cultural scripts, the personal fears that shape their attraction. And so, like sailors to the siren's song, they crash, again and again. But here is what Jung ultimately taught. The feminine is not the enemy. She is the gateway. A man's relationship to the feminine, within and without, is a mirror for his psychological health. If he fears women, idealizes them, or resents them, he must look inward. What part of himself is he running from? The dark feminine, whether in mythology, history, or modern life, is not a threat to destroy a man. She is the force that demands his growth. She will test his ego, expose his illusions, and confront him with his shadow. And if he rises to meet her consciously, she can become his greatest teacher, not by making him feel small, but by showing him where he has been asleep. In the next section, we will explore this in more depth. What exactly is the anima? How does she operate in the psyche? And how can understanding her change the way we navigate love, desire, and identity itself? Let's go deeper. To understand Carl Jung's warning fully, the shocking dark truth about certain women and why some men fall into obsessive or self-destructive relationships, we must venture into the symbolic and psychological terrain of the anima. This is not a theory meant to categorize women, but a mirror held up to the male psyche. It reveals what is often hidden, that the inner feminine, when repressed or misunderstood, can quietly dictate how a man relates to real women, sometimes with devastating results. The anima is not a woman. She is an inner figure, an emotional, instinctual, intuitive energy that exists within every man. Just as Jung believed that every woman contains an unconscious masculine, animus, he believed that every man carries within him a feminine principle. This principle is not about gender or roles. It is about the psychological balance between thought and feeling, action and reflection, logic and emotion. Jung wrote that the anima develops in 4 major stages. Each stage reflects a deeper, more integrated relationship to the feminine within, and each one corresponds to a certain type of woman a man is likely to project onto, especially if he is unconscious of the process. The first stage is Eve, the biological woman, the maternal figure. Here, the man experiences the feminine as a source of comfort, nourishment, and care. Attraction at this level may be rooted in dependency, a longing for safety or motherly validation. When a man has not worked through his early attachment wounds, he may unconsciously seek women who resemble his mother emotionally. This can lead to enmeshment or emotional infantilization. The second stage is Helen, the seductive and romantic figure. She is beautiful, exciting, and idealized. At this stage, a man is drawn to a woman for her outward charm, her looks, her status, her social glow. But the connection often lacks emotional depth. There's infatuation, but not intimacy. This is the realm of the siren, where desire burns hot but fades fast, leaving behind confusion or resentment. The third stage is Mary, the spiritual woman, the moral, virtuous guide. Here, the feminine becomes a symbol of wisdom or purity. At this stage, a man may seek a woman who inspires him ethically, or he may put her on a pedestal. But even this can be a trap if she becomes an unattainable symbol, rather than a real person with flaws and complexity. The final stage is Sophia, the wise woman, the fully integrated feminine. This is the rare stage, where a man no longer projects an ideal onto women, but relates to them as whole beings. More importantly, he has integrated the anima within himself. He no longer needs a woman to complete him emotionally, because he has cultivated a deep connection to his own soul, his feeling life, his intuitive depth. When a man has not developed through these stages, when he remains stuck at the earlier, unconscious levels, the anima becomes what Jung called a temptress or sorceress. Not because women are inherently manipulative, but because the man is still a stranger to his own emotions. He projects everything onto her, his longing, his pain, his resentment. And when she does not behave according to the fantasy, he feels betrayed. This is why some men describe relationships where they felt addicted, where they lost themselves, where they were emotionally dependent, confused, even degraded. Jung would not say they were simply unlucky in love. He would ask, "What inner wound are you repeating? What part of your anima is running the show?" Modern psychology echoes these insights. In attachment theory, we now understand that people with anxious attachment styles often become fixated on emotionally unavailable partners. They confuse intensity with intimacy. The highs and lows feel like love, but they are trauma replays. Jung's Anima explains this at a deeper symbolic level. The unavailable woman activates the man's inner chaos. She forces him to confront his abandonment wounds, his lack of boundaries, his fear of being alone. Meanwhile, a man with an avoidant attachment style may be drawn to fiery, emotional women, only to feel overwhelmed and withdraw. This dynamic is often read as incompatibility, but it is more like a dance between the conscious and unconscious. The woman represents everything he has not accepted in himself: vulnerability, chaos, feeling. He is drawn in, not by her alone, but by the part of himself she awakens. It is easy to misread this, to blame the woman, to call her toxic, manipulative, or unstable. But from a Jungian perspective, the real drama is unfolding inside the man. She is not the cause, she is the trigger. She is the mirror reflecting back the parts of himself he has not owned. The anima also plays a key role in creative energy. Many of Jung AS patients found that when they withdrew their projections and began integrating the anima consciously, through dream work, active imagination, or therapy, they became more creative, intuitive, emotionally aware. Their relationships improved not because they found better partners, but because they became better partners to themselves. In this light, the dark feminine is not something to fear, but something to understand. She represents chaos, yes, but chaos with purpose. In ancient myths, she often initiates the hero's journey. She breaks his illusions, shatters his ego, tests his resolve, not to destroy him, but to make him whole. In today's society, we are rarely taught to think this way. Instead, we categorize people as toxic or healthy, safe or unsafe, good or bad. But human beings are not categories. They are symbols, stories, constellations of wounds and wisdom. A woman who seems destructive to one man might be healing to another, depending on how each relates to their own psyche. This is why Jungian work is not about judgment. It is about integration. The goal is not to avoid certain types of women, but to become so self-aware that no external force can rob you of your inner center. The more you know your own anima, the less you project it onto the world. You stop chasing storms and start choosing peace, not out of fear, but out of alignment. And when you meet a woman with powerful, chaotic, emotional energy, you no longer collapse or attack. You listen, you discern. You see her clearly, not through the fog of fantasy or fear. You decide, not based on unconscious need, but conscious choice. That is the mark of a psychologically mature man. He is no longer ruled by the hidden anima. He has made her a partner in his inner world, his creativity, his emotional life, his intuition, and in doing so, he becomes more whole, more human, more free. As we move into the next section, we will explore the real-world consequences of not doing this inner work. What happens when a man stays unconscious of his anima? How does it affect his relationships, his career, his mental health? And what can we learn from the lives of others, historical, mythical, and modern, who have danced with this dark feminine force and either grown or perished in her shadow? Let's continue. When the unconscious anima rules a man's inner world, the consequences ripple far beyond fleeting romance. They reach into his very sense of identity, his relationships, and even his ability to function in society. This is not a mere psychological curiosity. It is a living, breathing drama, playing out every day in the hearts and minds of countless men. Imagine a man who has never met his anima consciously. He approaches women with a mix of desire, confusion, and fear. His attraction is intense but unstable. Sometimes he idolizes the woman as perfect, only to later resent or feel betrayed by her. This push and pull creates emotional chaos. He becomes trapped in cycles of obsession, jealousy, or emotional withdrawal. Over time, these cycles erode his confidence and sense of self-worth. Jung described this experience as a form of psychic possession. The anima, when unintegrated, can possess a man's emotions, making him feel like a puppet to feelings he does not understand. He becomes reactive, not reflective. His mood depends on the presence or absence of the woman onto whom he projects his anima. Without her, he feels empty or lost. With her, he may feel overwhelmed and powerless. This pattern is deeply painful and isolating. Men who fall into it often report feeling misunderstood, not only by others but by themselves. Their relationships mirror this inner turmoil. They might choose partners who amplify these unconscious conflicts, triggering unresolved wounds from childhood or past trauma. For example, a man with an anxious attachment may repeatedly choose emotionally unavailable women, unknowingly recreating early abandonment pain. This dynamic has been documented throughout history in stories and myths, where men fall victim to women who seem to drain their vitality or sanity. Take, for instance, the tale of the Lady of Shalott in Arthurian legend. She is trapped, cursed, unable to engage with the world directly, reflecting a woman who embodies both allure and fatality. The men around her suffer from her unattainability and mystery, a symbolic representation of the anima as power to enrapture and imprison. Similarly, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, Ophelia can be read as an embodiment of the feminine that confuses and destabilizes the prince. His inability to reconcile his feelings for her, torn between idealization and suspicion, parallels the struggle with the unconscious anima. Hamlet's madness, at least partly, reflects the chaos unleashed when the anima is projected but not integrated. The consequences of such dynamics extend beyond emotional distress. When a man's inner feminine is denied or distorted, it can manifest as a profound disconnection from his own emotional reality. This often leads to destructive coping mechanisms, substance abuse, withdrawal, aggression, or compulsive behavior. The man is searching for balance but is caught in the crossfire between suppressed feelings and external pressures to be strong or man up. On a social level, these unresolved anima dynamics affect not just individual relationships, but entire cultural patterns. Societies that encourage men to repress emotional expression produce generations vulnerable to unhealthy relational patterns. Men learn to fear their feelings and to view women as sources of either threat or salvation, rather than as whole, complex human beings. This has real-world consequences for families, communities, and workplaces. Emotional repression contributes to misunderstandings, conflicts, and violence. It stifles empathy and deep connection. It limits the capacity for collaboration and authentic leadership. In short, it creates a world where many men are disconnected, from themselves and from those they love. Yet the story is not only about loss, it is also about potential. Jung believed that when a man begins the work of integrating his anima, The very qualities that once overwhelmed him become sources of creativity, empathy, and wisdom. This process is neither quick nor easy. It requires courage to face the shadow within. Consider the many artists, writers, and thinkers throughout history who were said to be haunted by the feminine muse, an inspiration that could bring both ecstasy and torment. Frida Kahlo's paintings, for example, express the raw intensity of feminine pain and power, an inner world that unsettles yet heals. The anima, when embraced, becomes a guide to deeper self-understanding. On a personal level, men who work consciously with their anima report improved emotional regulation, healthier relationships, and a greater sense of inner peace. They become less reactive, more discerning. They no longer chase illusions but choose connections based on mutual respect and authenticity. The cost of neglecting this inner work, however, remains high. It is a cost paid not only in broken hearts but in diminished lives. When the anima is denied or demonized, men risk living fragmented lives, cut off from the full spectrum of their humanity. Their relationships may be fraught with misunderstanding, power struggles, and unspoken pain. Their own creativity and emotional vitality may wither under the weight of repression. In a larger sense, this psychological disconnection contributes to the confusion many men feel today about what it means to be a man. The old models of masculinity, stoic, dominant, emotionally distant, are increasingly inadequate. Yet the new models are not always clear or supported. This leaves many men caught in liminal spaces, vulnerable to repeating unconscious patterns with the women in their lives. What Jung's dark truth reveals is this: the feminine is not the problem. The problem is unconsciousness. When a man is unaware of his anima, he repeats history in his own life. He falls into patterns as old as time: obsession, idealization, fear, and resentment. The path forward is to turn inward, to recognize the anima not as an enemy, but as a hidden part of self that yearns for recognition, to cultivate awareness, emotional honesty, and empathy, to stop projecting inner shadows onto others, and to start seeing women and oneself with clarity and compassion. Only then can the dark truth become a source of liberation, not suffering. Only then can relationships become a place of growth, not conflict. And only then can men step fully into the complexity and richness of their own humanity. Now that we have peeled back the layers of the anima's power and the shadow it can cast when unrecognized, the question naturally arises: how can men begin to engage consciously with this deep inner feminine energy? How can they transform what once felt like chaos and confusion into strength and self-understanding? The answer is not found in avoidance or simplistic fixes. It is a journey, a process of gradual awakening that requires courage, patience, and honesty. The anima does not reveal herself all at once. She unfolds slowly, often through discomfort, reflection, and inner work. One of the most powerful ways to start this journey is through self-reflection and journaling. This practice invites you to slow down and observe your emotional patterns without judgment. When you find yourself caught in intense feelings about a woman, whether admiration, anger, jealousy, or longing, pause and ask, what is this really about? Am I reacting to her, or am I reacting to something inside me? Try to write freely about your feelings and experiences. Don't censor or analyze too much at first. Let the words flow, like a conversation with your unconscious. Over time, patterns will emerge. Clues pointing to parts of your anima that are seeking recognition or healing. Dream journaling is another potent tool. Jung believed dreams are the language of the unconscious, where the anima often appears symbolically, as a woman, a river, the moon, or even an animal. Recording your dreams regularly and reflecting on their themes can reveal hidden aspects of your inner feminine. Ask yourself, what emotions does the dream evoke? How might it relate to my waking relationships or fears? Alongside journaling, therapy, or guided inner work can be transformative. A skilled therapist trained in Jungian or depth psychology can help you navigate the anime-esque landscape safely. They can guide you through active imagination exercises, dialoguing with inner figures, and help you integrate difficult emotions. Therapy offers a supportive container to face the shadow without being overwhelmed. Modern psychology also offers practical approaches to emotional regulation that complement this inner exploration. Techniques such as mindfulness meditation encourage present moment awareness, allowing you to witness your feelings without becoming entangled in them. This creates space to respond rather than react, an essential skill when the anima stirs intense emotions. Another effective method is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which helps identify and challenge distorted thoughts, like idealizing or demonizing a partner, that fuel unhealthy projections. When you learn to recognize these patterns, you gain freedom to choose new ways of relating. Beyond these psychological tools, ancient wisdom traditions offer invaluable guidance on relating to the feminine, both within and without. Stoicism, for example, teaches the power of distinguishing between what is within your control and what is not. You cannot control another person's behavior, but you can control how you respond. This mindset fosters emotional resilience and prevents the anima's chaos from overwhelming you. Sufi teachings invite you to embrace love and loss as essential parts of the soul's journey. The feminine in this tradition is often represented as the beloved, both nurturing and mysterious, always inviting deeper surrender and growth. Embracing this paradox encourages you to honor complexity rather than seek simple answers. Practically, cultivating healthy boundaries is crucial. When the anima is unconscious, boundaries often dissolve. Men may become enmeshed in codependent dynamics or tolerate disrespect out of fear of loss. Learning to assert your needs respectfully, say no when necessary, and maintain your sense of self creates the container where genuine connection can flourish. In everyday life, small habits can deepen your relationship to the anima. Engage with art, music, or literature that stirs your emotions and imagination. Spend time in nature, noticing cycles and rhythms that echo inner transformation. Practice active listening. Not just hearing words, but tuning into emotional undercurrents in conversations with women and others. Remember that this work is not about perfection or control. The anima is wild and mysterious by nature. Sometimes she will challenge you, confuse you, or pull you into vulnerability. The goal is not to tame her, but to dance with her, to move from fear to curiosity, from resistance to acceptance. As you grow in self-awareness, you may notice shifts in your relationships. You will attract partners who reflect your maturity and authenticity rather than your unconscious needs. You will communicate with more clarity and compassion. And, importantly, you will begin to stand on your own emotional ground, no longer swept away by every storm of feeling. This is the essence of Jung's message. When you meet your inner feminine consciously, you gain access to a wellspring of creativity, intuition, and emotional richness. You become more fully yourself, a man who honors complexity, embraces vulnerability, and relates from wholeness rather than lack. To help you start this journey today, consider these simple steps. Set aside 10 minutes each day for journaling or quiet reflection. Pay attention to your dreams. Keep a notebook by your bed. Practice mindful breathing when you feel overwhelmed by emotion. Notice your patterns in relationships without judgment. Explore creative outlets that connect you to feeling and imagination. Seek support from a therapist or mentor who understands depth psychology. Read mythology or poetry that explores feminine archetypes. Practice saying no when your boundaries are crossed. Spend time in nature, observing cycles and changes. Be patient and gentle with yourself. This is a lifelong journey. As you commit to these practices, you may find the dark truth less shocking and more liberating. You will see the feminine not as a threat, but as a guide, a powerful, vital force that, once embraced, helps you become a more whole and conscious man. The journey inward is never easy, but it is always worth it. With each step, you reclaim pieces of your soul lost to fear and projection. You build the foundation for relationships that nourish rather than deplete, and you awaken to the profound mystery and beauty of your own inner life. This is not just personal growth. It is part of a greater cultural shift toward emotional intelligence, authentic connection, and healing the divides between masculine and feminine energies. By working with the Anima consciously, you contribute to a legacy of wholeness that reaches far beyond yourself. Let us now move to the conclusion, where we will bring together these threads of history, psychology, and personal transformation, inviting you to reflect on what it means to face the dark truth and emerge stronger, wiser, and more alive. As we come to the close of this exploration into Carl Jung's dark truth about the feminine within men, it is important to pause and reflect on what this journey has revealed. The Anima, the unconscious feminine part of a man's psyche, is no mere psychological curiosity. It is a powerful force shaping emotions, relationships, and even identity itself. When ignored or misunderstood, it can sow confusion, pain, and chaos. But when embraced consciously, it becomes a source of profound growth, creativity, and authentic connection. Throughout history, this dynamic between men and their inner feminine has been told in myths, legends, and art, stories that speak across cultures and centuries. From the haunted muse of artists to the tragic figures in classic literature, the Anima's power has been both feared and revered. These stories serve as echoes of the unconscious struggles that still live in us today. What has changed, and what remains the same, is the challenge of becoming conscious. In ancient times, men often relied on ritual, myth, and community rites of passage to meet their inner feminine and integrate its gifts. In our modern world, that sacred work often falls to the individual alone, requiring new tools and courage to face what was once hidden. The dark truth that Jung illuminated is not meant to scare or shame. Instead, it calls for awareness, a deepening of self-knowledge. The shadows that the Anima casts are simply parts of ourselves that long for recognition and healing. They are invitations to expand our emotional horizons and reclaim wholeness. You may find this unsettling. You may feel resistance to looking inward, to confronting feelings or patterns that seem uncomfortable. This is natural. The journey into the psyche is like stepping into a dense forest at dusk, uncertain, mysterious, sometimes frightening. But it is also where hidden treasures lie. Insights, compassion, and the seeds of transformation. Ask yourself now, how might your life change if you stopped projecting your unconscious fears and desires onto others? How might your relationships deepen if you approached women and yourself with curiosity rather than judgment? How might your sense of self expand if you learned to dance with your anima rather than fear it? These questions are not abstract. They are deeply personal and urgent, because the way we relate to the feminine within affects the way we relate to the world without. It shapes how we love, how we lead, how we heal. Remember, this work is not about achieving perfection or fitting into prescribed roles. It is about becoming more fully human, complex, vulnerable, strong, and tender all at once. It is about reclaiming parts of yourself lost to fear, culture, or pain. It is about creating space for authenticity and emotional richness in a world that often values only surface strength. In embracing your anima, you join a lineage of seekers across time, philosophers, poets, mystics, and everyday men who dared to face their shadows and emerge transformed. You contribute to a collective healing, helping to balance the masculine and feminine energies within society itself. This balance is not a final destination, but a continuous dance. Sometimes the anima leads, sometimes you do. Sometimes the path is clear, sometimes it is shrouded in mystery. The key is to remain open, curious, and compassionate, with yourself and with others. So, as you leave this conversation, Carry with you the invitation to explore your inner world bravely. Practice patience with yourself as you navigate the complex landscape of feelings and relationships. Cultivate kindness for the parts of you that have been misunderstood or neglected. And remember, you are not alone in this journey. We walk it together, each of us seeking wholeness, connection, and meaning. In the end, the dark truth is not a curse, but a door. Behind it lies the possibility of deeper love, richer creativity, and a life lived with greater purpose and awareness. What will you discover when you step through? Now that we have journeyed through the depths of Carl Jung's insights and uncovered the profound truths about the feminine within men, I invite you to pause and reflect on what this means for your own life. This space we share here is more than just a place for information. It is a place for growth, for emotional intelligence, and for meaningful reflection. You are not here by accident. Whether you have felt the pull of something deeper inside or struggled with patterns in your relationships, this is your invitation to reclaim your personal power, to master your inner world and live with greater purpose. Together, we explore not just psychology or history, but the lived experience of being human, full of contradictions, complexity, and beauty. This journey requires courage and curiosity. It asks you to meet your shadows without judgment and to welcome the parts of yourself you may have hidden away. If you find value in this deep, reflective space, a space where you can learn practical tools for self-awareness, emotional regulation, and authentic connection, consider subscribing. By joining us, you commit to ongoing exploration, to peeling back layers, and to walking toward wholeness with intention. This is not about quick fixes or superficial content. It is about embracing the challenge of growth, understanding the power dynamics that shape our lives, and learning how to lead with integrity and empathy. So, ask yourself, how might your life change if you continued to nurture this inner dialogue? What new insights and strengths could you uncover by committing to this path? If you feel ready to take that step, subscribe and become part of a community dedicated to emotional intelligence, self-mastery, and meaningful transformation. Together, we can create a space where vulnerability is strength, reflection is action, and growth is a shared journey. The path inward is rich and challenging, but you do not have to walk it alone. Let us walk it together.